All right, everyone, welcome. It is session 3, so it's the end of week 1. It's Thursday, April 20th. Tonight, we're going to talk about arrays and their built-in methods. So, as I had mentioned in the previous classes, like night 1, night 2 is kind of a real dense, me talking a lot, going through all these different concepts that are the basic building blocks of JavaScript. And now, over these remaining sessions, we're going to kind of pick apart each of those sections and do a deeper dive into each one of them. So again, happy to answer any questions as we go. We're going to talk. I'm going to do some demonstration in Replit, and we'll take some notes. And again, I'll publish the notes to the Intro to Coding channel, and then we'll pick up a challenge, and maybe we'll look at a challenge with an array in it tonight. And I'll lead the class in one, we'll do the prep, and then we will have everyone either pair, mob, or take some time to take a stab at a challenge on your own, and we'll come back and explain it in front of the class. One thing I did want to talk about before we get going in the slides is the Slack. So again, with hopefully everyone's in this Intro to Coding channel. You can ask questions. This is where I post the notes. If you need help, I mean, you can always reach out to me. I try and answer questions on here. I do have a day job during the day, so I don't necessarily always see it, but I pretty much always have my Slack on. So when you do the @self-paced TAs, that's myself, Chris Howell, Francisco Avila, who is the Python Intro to Coding teacher, and then Guillermo Aguilar, who is the pre-work instructor, and apparently the hype train coordinator. So all 4 of us are volunteers when we're answering questions in here. We like answering questions. We like helping out. There are definitely some things that you can do to help us out if you're asking for questions in here. And the big thing is that you're not dumping unformatted code into Slack. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if I come over here, and I'll just grab a chunk of code over here. Oh, not that one because I'm exporting. So sure, this will work. So if I come over here into Slack and I just copy my code out of a Replit and I drop it in here, this is what I get. This is not super easy to read. And what we ask is if you need help and you need to drop some code in here, it helps if you do 3 backticks. So again, up at the top left-hand corner of your keyboard underneath the escape key. So 1, 2, 3, and then you get a code box and it formats your code for you. Right. And so this is much easier to read in Slack if you do it this way. If you have a larger piece of code that you're working with, because this is still hard, because notice how it's still just a bunch of code. So you could say like, hey, Charles, I need help with the while loop or my variable. But if you just say, I'm having a problem with this, and you can't really walk us on to what's going on, it makes it a little bit more difficult. What you can do is / and then start to type in the word snippet, and you will get a option here to create a text snippet. And what's nice about a text snippet is you can put code in here, you will get line numbers, and then you can leave it auto detect, or if you know what you're working with, you can come up here and you can say JavaScript, and it will format your code for you. And it takes a second for the snippet to show up. But now when someone comes in here and looks at this, you can say, hey, I'm having a problem around between lines 5 and 7. This is much easier to read, right? So we've got a hard to read, a better to read, and then the best option. And you don't need to create a snippet for every single problem you have. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of code being dropped in here lately. People do screenshots and stuff along those as well, right? So someone dropping in screenshots, taking a picture of your phone with the code. This is all great too. This is readable, but if you're going to copy paste text in there, make sure that you throw some sort of formatting on there to help the people that are trying to help you with it. All right.
Real quick, how did you get the snippet? I glanced away, and so I didn't see what you did.
It's gone forever. Just kidding. So it's / and then just start to type the word snippet, and you'll see create a text snippet. And that is
Gotcha.
so furthermore within Slack, the / is what allows you to access any of the connected apps. And then of course the big one is Giphy. So / Giphy, right? And we can say fun, right? And we can pick our GIFs and we can post those in there as well. So that always goes a long way when asking for help. But yeah, so / gets you into the menu, and snippet, and you just start typing the word snippet and you'll get the snippet. And if you don't have enough code, or it's not a 3 backticks will give you the code block. You can also click on the code block over here. And if you're just doing one line, you can actually do a single backtick. Right, and that will give you like basically inline code. So code block, snippet, inline code, and that's all available on Slack, and it just makes it easier to read your code when you're asking for help. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into session 3 here. And tonight we are going to be talking about built-in methods. And so a method is basically a function that is bound to any given data type, right? So strings, as a data type, strings are going to have their own set of built-in methods. Number will have their own built-in methods, array, object. And those are like the 4 primary data types that you're going to interact with. Methods tend to always perform actions on or using the value being stored in that data type. The action performed may either mutate the data in place without returning a new value, or it can not mutate the existing value, but return a brand new value, which you would need to store in a variable yourself. And again, going back to that first day, Loki brought it up. With a lot of stuff, when you're writing software, if you don't manually save it somewhere, it is gone for forever. It will just take the information, it will do the action that you told it to, and then if you don't tell the computer to save it in a line of code, your program will just look at you and be like, what do you want me to do now? Right, and you'll end up with unintended consequences. All right, so a few built-in examples. So string methods, concat. This one always I kind of roll my eyes at. You can use concat if you want to, but it's literally the same thing as adding a plus sign, right? So I can say let word equal right, and I can do something like this. Right, and I've concatenated my string there, or I can do something like this where I basically can't even remember what order it goes in. So if I do word dot concat sentence, right, and I don't have an extra space in there, so I think it'll smash it all together, right? So I can just add a space up here, So this is a built-in method that does the same thing as a plus sign with a string. So whatever way you want to do with it. If you want to type in one character to get there, or if you want to type in basically 8 characters to get there. Includes is good. And again, this is how we are going to start thinking about manipulating data, right? So I can say sentence dot includes, and I can say hello, and that returns false, right? Because the word hello is in the variable word, not in sentence. But I could do something and say in, right? And now I get a true because it knows that this string is somewhere inside this string, either the whole thing or a substring of it. And so now this becomes useful when we're getting multiple responses and when we're looking for a keyword in a series of strings coming to us as responses, and we need to take action when we see a specific word, right? Like, so maybe we're corporate compliance, and every time someone sends an email, we run it through a filter that says, does this include the word fraud in it, right? Or was it any other keywords that we're looking for? And if so, then the software takes this action. Includes as a built-in method that enables that type of filtering. Trim chops off any white spaces or characters at the beginning or the end. So I could do something like this. Right, and see how hello is tight to the left again. It's gotten rid of all of that unnecessary white space. All right, so number, so to fixed, we used that yesterday in a challenge. We can also force a number to a string for whatever reason that we need to do that. And remember, sometimes we cast things to a string accidentally, or well, I shouldn't say accidentally, but not as part of the intention, right? Like if we're like, all we want to do is set decimal precision level, but it does that and it also converts it to a string. And so then we need to look at moving it back to a number after the fact. Any questions about the examples that we gave here, or kind of what a built-in method is? Okay, so
real quick on
Yes.
on the trim. So if you go back to your example on the trim, if in that white space, if just after the first quotation, single quote, if you had the letter A, is it going to delete the space between A and hello?
I don't believe it will, because it's only leading and trailing white space.
Okay.
Right, so that stays, but everything after goes still.
Roger, gotcha.
Right, so like, because like, and it's hard to demonstrate it, but like if I did this, well, put that there. Interest. I wonder if it's because I added the period first. That's probably what I just did. So let's do that, and then let's put it down here. So now I would think that I would trim it. Yep, I trimmed it, and then we added the period at the very end. Right, so but yeah, if you put another character in there anywhere, it only takes it from the beginning and the end.
Gotcha. I was that helps. I mean, it's these little finesse points when I'm trying to figure out the logic of what it does.
Yep, and like, and absolutely ask those types of questions. I'm happy to answer, or like, I mean, and again, I don't know because I just haven't tried it myself. But I'm happy to play around with it, figure it out. And again, I encourage everyone to do the same thing, right? Like, what happens when I do this? Well, put it in. It doesn't, there's no fake penalty points or anything like that. Like, you can put whatever you want in here and start clicking the button and see what happens. And then if you do something and it doesn't work the way that you thought it was going to work, I mean, you look up why it happened and drop it in the intro to coding, be like, hey, I tried this, I thought this was going to happen, but this is what happened. Can anyone explain this to me? And those are all ways to, I mean, help keep leveling up as we move forward.
New errors is still progress.
That's right. And read the error message. Had a demonstration one, or a lecture one time that was basically the first bullet point was read the error message, and then the second bullet point was no, really read the error message, because it's really easy to gloss over them. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what some of these built-in methods for arrays do here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a multi-line string here, or note, I should say, and we'll drop this in. All right, so dot push adds an element to the end of an array. So that, and let's go ahead and give ourselves an array here. So we'll say, we'll go back to the cats. All right, so when we do a push, that adds an element to the end of the array. So if I say cat names dot push, and let's make up another cat name, we'll say Tom, right? I say console.log cat names. There's Tom hanging out at the end of my array now, right? And so what that means is if I need to add additional elements to my array, as more data comes in and I find data that I need and need to add it to an array, I can use dot push to do that. And pop is the opposite. It removes the element from, it removes the last element from the end of the array. So if I do cat names dot pop, I don't have to put anything in there. And now I say console.log cat names, right? Tom is gone. Now, if I console.log my actual pop function or method, I see that I've got Tom. Now, Tom is no longer in the array. It's been removed. And right now, I'm not saving catnames.pop to anything, even though it has the value of Tom. So on line 30, it has the value of Tom. On line 31, catnames.pop no longer exists. It's gone forever. Unless I come over here and I save it to a variable, right? So I can say let removed name equal catnames.pop, and now it takes the last one. And so if I come in here and I say console.log removed name, right? Now I see Tom. So now I actually have Tom saved, and I can access that in different parts of my application, right? It gets saved on line 30. So on line 31, or I could be down here in line 60, I can go back and pull it out of memory and say, what is this again? And be like, okay, right? Because now I could say, well, maybe I want Tom back in there. So I could say something like cat names dot push removed name. And if I console.log this again, right, now it's back in there. Right, so when you do something like this, you either save it to a variable, and maybe once that name's off there, I don't need it ever again. Like it can be gone, I can throw it away, and that's perfectly fine. So you don't have to save every time you pop or shift something or splice or slice and take an element out of your array. You don't have to save it somewhere. If you don't need it anymore, you don't have to save it. But if you do need it somewhere else, then you're going to need to save it somewhere else. So that's just something to think about.
But just for clarity in how you were saying it, the way you had it written before, where you didn't save it to a variable or assign it to a variable, and it was catnames.pop. Catnames.pop technically still exists. It's just no longer Tom. It then becomes Petey in the next line.
No. No. So if I don't save this here, right? And let's take a look at .pop on MDN. Because so remember .pop and whoops, that's Python.pop, JavaScript.pop. So when I say, and this is the disconnect, maybe I haven't explained this well. So
Can you go larger?
Yep. Better?
Yeah.
All right.
That's better.
So this is a built-in method. So if you dig in under the hood in JavaScript, like in the source code of the actual language, somewhere in there, there is a function called pop with an element, right? And right, so it is a built-in function. So it's not like this amorphous concept. It is a function that does a specific thing, just like the functions that we're going to write to solve problems. It is just such a commonly used function that they have integrated it into the language itself. So all of these are functions, right? Like, and we haven't talked about object-oriented programming yet and what a class is and all these things. So when we see this array.prototype.pop, we're saying that anything that is an array, there is a function that works within the array data type that will do this specific action, right? And when we come in here and read this, so the pop method removes the last element from an array and returns that element, right? So in here, like inside our fake pop function that we're writing, the last line of code in there is return the element that's been removed, right? And so when I run .pop on cat names, it is removing the last name, which is Tom, right? Like that is all it has to do, and it returns Tom. And if I do not save that return value to an element, it is just gone for forever. It exists on line 35. It no longer exists on line 36, but it doesn't change what it targeted in here.
So correct. I guess just to clarify kind of what I think I follow everything you're saying. I guess what I was trying to say is when you do catnames.pop, that has the value of Tom at that point. Now, if the next line you do console.log catnames.pop, that's going to move down towards Petey.
Yes. So each time you do it, it's going to be a different one.
Correct. So it's that specific value of catnames.pop.
Well, when we say specific value, and so right, each time I run this, right, so I could say right, so the first time I run this, it's going to be Tom. The second time it's going to be Petey. If I keep going, it'd be Nugget, then Mo, then Todd. Right.
Roger. Okay.
You
That's
can
what I was
keep
thinking.
doing it. Yep. And you could save these to their own individual variables if you needed to, but if these don't get saved, they disappear.
Correct. The value of that event of dot pop is lost unless it's attached to a variable.
Yep.
And so any use of dot pop is a new value subsequent to that.
Right, but even if I save it to a variable name, it's still a new variable. Like, so if
Correct. Correct.
Yep, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Right, because if I run dot pop, all dot pop does is remove the last element inside of an array, whether I save it or not. If I run it again, it has nothing to do with if I saved the previous one or not. It's just coming back to this array again and looking for the last value.
Gotcha. That I'm following.
Okay. And so shift and unshift do the same thing, just at the opposite end of the array. So if I do a shift, so again, so if I do console.log cat names dot shift, right? What's going to happen is we're going to go from Todd, Mo, Nugget, and PD to just Mo, Nugget, and PD, right? And console.log cat names. Right, so we see Todd, that's here. And now we're down inside the array, we're down to 3, Mo, Nugget, and PD. So let's go ahead and save this one. And then so unshift adds an element to the beginning of the array. So now I can come in here and say and if we take a look at cat names again, right, Todd is back in there because we took it, we saved the name, we take a look at the array, Todd's not in there. We use the unshift command referencing this variable, which has the value of Todd saved as a string, and we plug it back into the array. So we're right back to where we were before we did the shift and unshift. All right, and now with pop and shift, it returns the element that it removed. But if we take a look at something like unshift, right? So it returns the new length of the array, right? So I didn't console.log this, but if I do this, what's going to happen is it's just going to return a number, which is the new length of the array, which should be 4. Right, so there's my 4. And sometimes, and like I said, that's why we look these things up. Like, I wouldn't expect that this returns anything, but they do have it set to return the length of the array. I don't know how I would necessarily go about using that, but I mean, it's there if you need it. And
Yes, if you're iterating through and trying to build an array, but you want to hit a maximum value, say you only want 5 employees in the array, and so you terminate once the unshift value equals this.
yeah, and that
could probably do something like that, I guess.
Right. So yeah, I mean, if we're drawing a random lottery of 5 names, like we could do something like that, and stop once the array hits a certain length. Do it that way. We could use that in a while loop instead of building a separate static count. If we use a for loop, then again we would build our own iterator. We would need that. And so there's different ways to get the same thing done, basically. All right. So next, we just got rid of these 2. So we've got slice and splice. These 2 sound very similar, slice and splice, but they do different things. So slice returns a copy of an array of starting elements and ending elements. Splice changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements. So let's take a look at these on MDN real quick. All right, so slice, the method returns a shallow copy of a portion of array into new array object selected from start and end and not included where start and end represent the index of the items in that array. The original array will not be modified. So again, the original array will not be modified. So let's go ahead and grab their examples here. All right, so if we've got animals, an array animals, ant, bison, camel, duck, elephant. If we slice at 2, right, we see our result should be camel, duck, elephant. So let's go ahead and run it and see if that's what we get. We get camel, duck, elephant. And so what that is saying is start your slice at the second index position, right? So 0, 1, 2. So it is inclusive. We get camel in there and keep going because we didn't give it a ending amount, right? So same thing, if we do 2 as a starting point and 4 as an end point, right? We get just camel and duck because we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember, the starting index position is inclusive, but the ending index position is exclusive, right? And saying we 1 and 5 here, right? So we get bison, camel, duck, elephant, right? So we get we start 0 and 1, and even though we're going past the end of it, it doesn't matter because we've got that. If we do 6, I don't know if we'll get the same thing or if it'll throw an error. Nope. Yeah, so you can just keep going and going and going out past it. However, if you're the amount of elements in your array changes, it can impact that. But also, no, just because we get bison, camel, duck, elephant by doing this slice, remember, slice does not impact the actual array itself. So if I take a look at the array after the slice, the array is unaffected.
Okay, that was the question I was about to ask you. So you're taking a sample of that array, but you're not removing from the array.
Correct. And it says it right here. The original array will not be modified.
Gotcha.
Right. And so when we do the return value, a new array containing the extracted elements. And
so in this case, the slice is a good idea to attach to a variable because obviously you want to do something with that sample because you're not changing your array.
right. Well, and it's if let's say that I'm going to give you 100 arrays of varying lengths, and there's going to be at least 6 animals in every array, and no more than 10. I want all animals after the first 2 each time, right? Then you would use a slice to display all of the animals except for the first 2 over and over and over again. And then that's like a silly example, but that's why you would use slices, that you're only looking to display a portion of the results that you get back.
Got it.
All right, let's go to this. And slice also goes backwards, right? So if we put in -2, right? So we've got elephant and duck, right? So -1, -2. if we change this to a -3, right, we keep counting backwards from the end. And then we also have the
Can you
ability.
do a comma and 2 negative numbers in there?
Yes, you should be able to do 2 negative numbers. And what's going to happen is, so let me show the difference here, right? So if I say, Charles, I only want to see the last 2 animals in this array, right? And so I say, okay, no problem. So I can do animals.slice, and let's go ahead and say, well, we'll figure this out, right? So I've got 5 elements in there, so 4. So let's go ahead and throw a 3 in here, and let's see what happens. Right, so those are the last 2 elements, right? And so what happens though, if I come in and I do something like animals dot push zebra, right? So now I'm actually seeing 3 elements instead of just the last 2 elements, right? And so if I'm doing something like -2, I only get the 2 elements, right? And if I get rid of this, I still only get the last 2 elements, regardless of the size, right? Even if I come in here and I do animals dot shift, right? This should be pulling ant off, but I'm still seeing these last ones here, right? And same thing, if I had left this as a 3, I believe I'm only going to see elephant at this point. Right now, I'm only getting 1. And so it works when I look at this as something that's static, but if this data can change, this is how I can guarantee that I only see the last 2 elements. And now it's the same thing, like, regardless of the size of this, Charles, I only want to see the second to last and third to last each time. Then we could do something where we do like -2. I think -4 would be where we're at. No. I'm not sure what order to put these in. I've never actually done this before. There we go. So now we've got bison and camel. Let's go ahead and say -3, -1. All right, so now I've got camel and duck. So now I'm seeing the second to last and third to last. If I add ant back in here, right, I'm still getting the second to last, third to last. So there's all different ways that you can play with this. And notice how, like, I didn't know exactly off the top of my head what I was going to get. I've honestly never done double negative numbers before, but the crowd asks, I'll do what I can to deliver, right? And
Thanks.
I just throw in a couple of numbers that I think gets me close, right? The first time I did it, because I was thinking like we were counting from the front, right? Like this gave me an empty array, because if you think about it, my numbers are crossed over each other. So there's like nothing there. I basically turned it inside out. And so, okay, well, I flip flop it, and I had like -4, -2. I was seeing things again, but it wasn't the ones that I wanted, but I could see that I was off by 1. So, hey, like I'll adjust my numbers. There's absolutely nothing wrong with getting this stuff wrong. And it's not a test. The stuff isn't carved in stone. We aren't using punch cards anymore, which, if anyone's not familiar with that, the very first computers, like back in the 1950s, you used to have to literally take sheets of like cardstock and punch holes in them and then feed them into a machine. So when people wrote code, they're doing it by punching out little tabs on these big pieces of paper and then feeding them into a machine, right? And if you screwed up, you had to take your punch card out and put a piece of tape over the hole that you shouldn't have punched out and punch out a different hole. And the original software development was a nightmare, right? But now we get run buttons and everything's free, and we just keep plugging away, and you take your best shot at it. And if you miss, you adjust and you keep going. Like it's not we're not like in some sort of a field where, like, if we don't get it right the very first time, that it, like, the building falls over, right? Like hopefully my general contractor that's remodeling part of my house isn't in there with a hammer and a nail going, like, I hope this nail's in the right spot. If it's not, I'll come back and fix it later, right? Like I don't want that out of a builder, but when we're writing software, it is the expected behavior. All right, so that was slice. Let me tackle, so, and I guess before I move on to splice, any other questions about slice? Okay, so we've got splice, and then we've got index of, join, for each, and dot map. All right, so we'll get through dot splice and a couple of these. We'll take our first break, and then we'll knock out the rest of these, and then we'll get into the challenges for the night. All right, splice sounds a lot like slice, but it is a little bit different, right? And so splice is to create a new array with a segment removed and or replaced without mutating the original array. So again, the original array doesn't get changed, right? It stays the way it was. We get a new array that is returned to us with the splice. And however, splice, instead of just taking a like a chunk of the previous array and making a shallow copy of it, splice is going to create a new array. You can take a chunk out of the original one, you can add stuff into it. There's a little bit more functionality in here in it. So, right, we've got a start, a delete count, and then basically you can insert additional items, comma separated in here. So let's go ahead and take a look at their example. Right, and so if I say months dot splice, and I want to put in the month February, right? So I have an item that I want to insert. So I have my start where I start, how much I want to delete, and then the new item that I want to put in. Right. And in this instance, right, we'll leave my start count for a second, but I know I don't want to delete anything, and I know I want to insert the abbreviation for February. Right. So if I do, we'll just start at 0 here because I don't really know what's going to happen yet. We'll say console.log. Oops. Right. Oops. What did I do wrong here? Because I started at 0. Months dot splice dot log. Huh. Why am I drawing a blank? Well, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. So let's go ahead. Let's just see what we get when we console.log months. Okay, so there it is. And we're going to do a splice. All right, and let's go ahead and take a look at this. And we've got our start count of 1, our delete count of 0, and then our month of February. Oh, and that's why, is because I was console.logging the actual splice. So when I do this, I'm not actually getting anything here, because if I look at this, return value, a new array containing the extracted elements. Oh, that's slice, not splice. splice, return value, an array containing the deleted elements. If only one element is removed, an array of one element is returned. If no elements are removed, an empty array is returned, right? And so I didn't delete anything. So when I'm running this and I see my empty array over here, this is exactly what it's actually supposed to be showing. If I want to delete something, so if I put a 1 in here, I'll get March. So what I would expect to see here is March. Yep, there's my March. But I don't want to delete March, so I'll send that back to a 0. I don't need to console.log this for right now. And we'll console.log months. All right, so now I have January, Feb, March, April, and June. So let's go ahead and do a second splice. And let's do our count. So 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So let's do a count of 3. We're going to delete 0. And this time we're going to insert May. And let's console.log months again. All right, so it looks like I put May in front of April. So let's bump this up to 4. All right, so now I've got Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June. And so if I don't want June in there anymore, we can do the same thing again. We're not going to insert anything this time. We're going to do 1 as our delete count. Let's throw a 5 in here. Oops. All right, 1, 2, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do 4. It's still there. So let's console log what we're getting out of this splice. What are you mad about?
Hey Charles, I think you had it right before. You're just not console logging the result afterwards. So you were removing June, you just weren't console logging June.
You're right again. So if I put this back to 5 and this was working right, we should see June in here. Console.log 2. There we go. Yeah, so there's our June. So June's been removed, and you're absolutely right. I wasn't console.logging the months again at the end. So if we throw that in here, there's our June from right here. And then when we console.log months this last time, there is no June on there. Right. So splice does a few more things than slice does. And let's see here. So what do we got after that? So we've got index of. So this one just it returns the index of the value. So if we say index of, and we say, let's see here, pull this up. Right, so we can say, back to our animals, we'll use months, but if we want to know what March is, right, so we can come in here and we can say index of, so we can say months dot index of, and we'll say March. And remember, because we added February in there, it's not going to look the same as it does up here. This would be in the 1 position, but I'm expecting that March should return that it's at the index of 2. All right, and so there's our index of 2. And we could do same thing here. If I do Jan, I'd expect to see an index of 0. And so that's what we've got for that. Let's see here. Join, I kind of demonstrated that yesterday. So if we do a console.log months.join, and if we don't put anything in here, right, we should get a comma separated value in string form here. If we just put an empty string, it'll just smash all the words together as one thing. And if we just put one space in here, we get the space between, and we can keep going. We can add a colon, we can add a comma in a space if we want it to look more like a readable format. We could write a little function that takes in an array, returns it as a comma separated list, but then also an and at the for the last position, right? So like we could keep going with that. And let's see here. So that was joined. So then there's for each and dot map. So it's 7 o'clock right now. So let's go ahead at 7:01. Does anyone have any questions about the like built-ins in general, or the built-ins that we've covered so far?
Just real quick, I just ran the console.log months.index of, and I did May, and I was just kind of surprised that instead of giving me the positive number, it gave me a -1.
So did you add May in? And
yeah, it was a new addition earlier than that. So so yeah, I had added May as a splice, displayed it, and then I tried using the index of it. I'm just curious if it's just choosing the shortest distance from either direction, because it gave me a -1. I wasn't expecting that, even though I understand what it means.
No, and what it means is a -1 means that it's not present.
But no, it's -1.
Right, -1, -1 means it's not present, right? So if I do months.index of Chuck, right, we know that's not in my months anywhere. Oops, index.
Because my May is last in my array.
Right, it's a -1. So, and if you want to drop your code into Slack, I can pull it up. I can let you screen share if you want to screen share. We can take a look directly at your code. But my guess is if you're getting -1, it may not be in there where you think it, and it is also case sensitive, right? So if I do like May all lowercase, I don't believe it'll pick up on it.
I think that's what it was. I think I was just misreading it because my May is lowercase and in my array it's capital. So I was just believing it was a -1 and doing a reverse index, but it must be the case.
Yeah, it is case sensitive. And I didn't mention that, but I want to say, yes, the index of method returns the first index at which a given element can be found in the array, or -1 if not present. I don't know if it says anything explicitly that it's case sensitive. Nope, it doesn't talk about it being case sensitive or not, but it is absolutely case sensitive. So
Gotcha. Yeah, that was the problem.
okay, cool. All right, well, it's 7:05. So let's go ahead and take like a 6 or 7 minute break. I'll see everyone back at 7:12, unless anyone else has got any other questions before we take this quick break. If not, we can always cover them when we get back to. All right, I'll see everyone at 7:12. All right, welcome back from the break. We've got a question about splice, and it's something I didn't cover on the first go through, so this is a good question. We're going to talk a little bit more about counting and deleting and then inserting. So if we look at splice on MDN, right, the second example they give is that they're going to count to the 4th index. they're going to delete one element and then they're going to insert one element. Right, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is June up here. This is what this would look like. Actually, I'm sorry. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, delete the one element and then replace it with the element May. And this is what we expect to see, right? And if we say replace this with Todd, right? And we run this, right? So then we go March, April, Todd. And change this back to May. Now, if we turn this to a 2 here, right? So we want to delete 2 things. There's only one thing to delete there, right? So June, and it doesn't start counting backwards, right? So we still have, we get the same thing, right? Like I could say delete 20 million here, right? And we still get the same thing because it's going to delete up to 20 million things that it finds starting at the 4th index position. But if there's only one thing to delete, it's the same thing as putting this there. Right now, if I count back an extra one, so if I only go to 3, right, and if I delete 1, then I've gotten rid of April, the one in front of June. So I go March, May, June. Now, if I do 2, right, now I go Jan, Feb, March, I delete April, I delete June, then I insert May. Right, and I could say start at 0, delete 20 up to 20 things that you find here, then insert May. Now the only thing I have in here is May, right? And if I do 1, right, then I go from Jan to May. If I don't delete anything, right, I go Jan and then I insert May. I haven't deleted anything, then I go Feb, March, April, June because I didn't delete anything. Right, if I delete one thing, then February went away. If I delete 2 things, I'm going to delete February and March, right? And then we insert May, then it goes April, June, right? And like I had said previously, if you're trying to accomplish something and you don't know exactly, like, hey, I know I need to delete something and I need to insert something, starting at like 1, 0, right? And I know I'm trying to get rid of June and I want to insert May. I put in 1, 0. Okay, this isn't what I'm looking for, right? So let's go ahead and change this to a 4. Right now I've got Jan, Feb, March, April, May. All right, so now I know that my May is in the right spot. Now I can go from here to here, right? Now I've gotten rid of June. So I'm just doing it incrementally, one step at a time, right? Like start it off, do it wrong, and then start to fine tune your inputs until you get to exactly what you're looking for. And just do it step by step. Don't worry about getting it right the very first time. Does that help?
It does. Let me ask you a quick question because you may have hit it or maybe I didn't read it right. This all indexes off of 1 as opposed to 0, or does it index 0?
It indexes off of 0.
Okay. Just wanted that
So
clarity.
if I start at 0, it's going to start at 0, which is January, delete one item, and then insert May. Right. So now January's gone and I've replaced it with May. Then we keep going about business as normal.
Perfect.
Sweet. Any other questions about Splice? Oops, I know this is a map and not dot map. There we go. Nope, that's a set. Array. All right. So next and kind of last on the list for the built-ins for arrays are for each and dot map. Now, if you recall when I talked about loops the other day and iterating, I said stick to while loop and for loop, and I mean that. you can use a dot map and you can use a for each, but it is a built-in method that abstracts away how a loop works from you. And I find that for very like for where you're at, where you're starting out learning how to code, this just makes your life more difficult. There's more levers that you can throw for things basically to go wrong. And even just figuring out when you should use a dot map and dot for each when you come to it, just use a for loop or a while loop. They're bigger, they're more lines of code, but they're easier to understand, and you get to see all of the mechanisms that you're playing with. When you've got a dot map or a dot for each, all of the code that does these are hidden under the hood inside JavaScript. So the map method creates a new array populated with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. Right? And so if we look at this code here, we've got array 1, which is an array of 4 elements. All of them are numbers 1, 4, 9, and 16. And when we are doing a map here, so on array 1 dot map, and we're saying X, and it doesn't have to be X, we could say number here, and we would just change the X's to num. And what we're saying is num times 2. And this is looping through the array. And so the first time through, num is equal to 1. But notice this fat arrow, we've got a function going on here, and we're saying 1 times 2. Then the second element, which is 4 times 2, 9 times 2, 16 times 2. So, and we're saving this dot map to a variable, which is called map1. And when we console.log map1, we're seeing basically the new array. So this array stays the same. So if I console.log array 1 as well, right? So the original array 1 stays the same, but we now have an array with 2, 8, 18, and 32 in it, which is exactly what we're expecting, right? And so we've got, this is called a callback function. And Loki, this is what we were talking about where, hey, I can do a fat arrow function and I'm not putting in the curly braces. Like I said, this allows you to be very sparse with your code. And this works because of the fat arrow function and the fact that it is on one line. If I needed to do something more complicated than this, like if I hit enter and I bring this down, then I have to wrap the whole thing in curly braces. Right, so then it looks like this again. And I guess this would be up here, but this is what we would do if we had more lines that we use. So if we had to do like num times 2 and then num times 4, well, whatever, like basically you end up having to add that stuff back in. So this is called a callback function, and you'll see these a lot with map and index of. You'll also see it in other built-in functions, but that's why I say to do this, you have to understand how a callback function works. You have to understand how this built-in works, and all you're doing is you're basically just circumventing a loop. So until you understand how and when you should be looping, just stick to writing for loops and while loops. And then once you've got those down, then we can start sprinkling in dot map and dot for each. Dot for each method executes a provided function once for each element in the array. So again, notice how we've got another callback function here, and we've got a console.log element, but notice how we're not saving this for each to a variable because this doesn't output anything, right? So return value, it returns undefined no matter what. A dot map returns a new array with each element being the result of a callback function, which in, oh, did I just, didn't want to do that, sorry. Let me glue this back up here. Right, so dot map, you keep your original array and you get a new array that you basically perform the same function on each element in the array, which was just the num times 2, and then it outputs that new array with for each. There is no return value, it just returns undefined. So if I take something like this, and when I run this, because I'm doing a console log as a function in the callback function, I'm still going to put out these letters to the array. But if I take this whole thing and I wrap it in a console.log as well to see what the output of this line is, I should get an undefined at the end, right? Because it does not return anything. And same thing back here. If I didn't save this to its own variable and I get rid of this and I just say console.log. Oops. Right, I still get it instead of it return. So that index of will return, or not index of, I'm sorry, for each will return undefined. This actually returns an array, right? And that's the primary difference between the two. But again, I won't spend too much more time on these two. You should really get comfortable writing for and while loops before you start adding these to your toolbox. Any questions about dot map or for each? Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So that's it. That's it for the slides for today. So we're basically on to some challenges. So let's go ahead. We'll pull up a challenge. I will go ahead and walk us through a challenge, and then we'll pick another challenge and figure out where to go from there. So we did total change due was the last challenge that we did yesterday. We've got convert to hours, mortgage payment, convert to hours and minutes. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at convert to hours. So click on it, come in here, click on the fork. We'll go ahead and fork the REPL. Close all of our pop-ups. Take a look at the README over here. Let me grab a copy of the prep. Oops. So there's that. Back over here. So another shortcut here is multiple cursors. And to do that, you select basically however many things, and you select enough of something to make it unique to what you want. So like if I just grab this and I start hitting Control D or Command D, I end up with way more cursors than what I need, right? Like, so a lot of stuff, but basically because I knew that I wanted to add a console.log in front of each of these, I just started here and got the TOH and knew that hit Control D, or if you're on a Mac, Command D, 1 time, 2 times. Now I've got 3 cursors. I can come back here to the front and I can type in my commands. Right, and then to get out of the multi-cursor, you just hit the escape button a couple of times, and it'll take you back to 1 single cursor. All right, so if I run this, I should get 3 falses, and I do. All right, so let's go ahead and do the prep work on this one. So I have 1 input, which is a number, right? So I'm getting a number of minutes, right? A function that takes in a number of minutes and return the hours equivalent to as a float integer. Right, so my return is also going to be 1 thing. It's also going to be a number, possibly a float, depending on how many minutes. All right, example, I've got 3 of them below. All right, and so let's take a look at the pseudocode here. Right, so I know I'm going to all right. Okay, so there's kind of the steps that I've laid out for myself. So I know for the first thing that I'll need to do is I need to return the number of minutes that I have in an hour format. And they want it in floating point format. Right, so if I do something like this, I'm going to create a variable. And let's go ahead and return hours. And let's see what we get just on our first pass here. So I get true, true, and false. So kind of the same issue that I ran into previously when we were doing the other one. Let's take a look here. So let's go ahead and also console.log hours so we can take a look at what we're doing. All right, so we've got the same thing again where we've got here now, without knowing more and exactly how many floating points we need to go to, we can always take a look at, I mean, this is out to the 3rd one, right? So if we do hours dot to fixed 3, right? So we've got that extra 0 there. We've got these, all of these as strings. So, and then if we take this whole thing and say parse float, right? So now we're back to numbers. We've got it there. And again, I'm doing this on my console.log, not on my return. So let's go ahead and take this and pop this down here. And I don't know if it's going to cause these other 2 to fail or not. Oh, so we've got true across the board. So very similar to how we handled our exact change yesterday. Now that we've got everything going true, we don't need to see the actual values, console.log there. Right, and we've got our trues. Now I could keep adding cases that may make these things blow up if like we needed to go out to a further one, but to get these 3 examples to pass, this is all we need to do. Does this course or Code Platoon cover interacting with the console or shell? We are interacting with the console right now, like basically since the beginning of class. Is there something else that you're looking for with it?
Not particularly, but I'm just curious if we ever learn more about using the shell.
So yes, you will. Because and you've seen me do it like when I'm over here, right? So I'm running a terminal and I'm on a Mac and I'm using Zish, and Mac has Unix, Linux, whatever it is native to it, and you either use a bash terminal or a Zish terminal, which is just a more modern bash. And we have all like everything you do in Code Platoon, especially once you get into version management, saving your files locally and then pushing them up to GitHub, which has anyone in class created a GitHub account yet?
Yes.
If not,
Yes.
Yes.
cool.
Yes.
It's definitely not necessary to go through intro to coding, but it's free to open up a GitHub account. I recommend learning how to play with it. 1 second here. Get my code. Not wearing the glasses. Ooh, first shot. Right. And so like I use this personally. There's a company I work for. I'm an administrator for all the Code Platoon ones, like the previous cohorts and everything. So I can see all the work. And what happens is it allows you to take your work and you save it on your computer, right? Like I'm using my work computer at Athlete, and I can pull down stuff that I created years ago on a different computer, right? Because it's saved up here and it saves all the changes. And let's see here. Let's look at a Rails project. Okay, so this is my terminal. I am in my shell or my console, and as soon as I entered this directory, which is a Git repository, right? Like this code is up on Git somewhere. I got Git added to my command line, and so I can now start to do things with my version history, right? So I can look at my log. Right? These are all the different, and these are the developers at another company that put this tutorial together, right? And like going back years, and we can look at it in another format. We can see these are all changes. And so when you write software, and it's the same thing, like the software I've been writing on the same 3 years, like the software's been around for 5 years. I can go back the full history of my software and go all the way back to the initial commit where where someone wrote the very first lines of code. Those people don't even work for the company anymore, but we can still look back in time and see what they did. And we can jump from the different layers of this application being built. Right. And so you will learn how to do that in Code Platoon. Git, especially when you're brand new, is not a lot of fun. It's confusing because it's basically an additional computer language that you're learning. And I will say there's plenty of stuff out there. So you can type in like Git tutorial and you watch videos on it. somewhere out here, maybe it's tutorial point. I can't remember if this is the one or not. No, it's not this one. There's like an interactive Git tutorial that you can play with, like type in the different commands and you can see visually what's happening. Yeah, this one, right? And so learning how Git, and so like you can type in these different sequences, do these different commands, and these are all different things that you can do in Git, and you'll see how your code changes on the screen, right? And I don't know if they still do this in Code Platoon or not, but this is a great one to have to play with. Like if you want to download GitHub and start playing with Git, it's just another thing that will help you. Even though, again, absolutely not required to do intro to coding, and you don't have to know anything about Git to walk in the door at Code Platoon. But the more you expose yourself to these different things, the better off you are. And because like once you become a professional developer, you live in Git, and maybe it's not GitHub, the project I'm on. I haven't used GitHub really since I graduated from Code Platoon and my apprenticeship, because my project is using AWS Code Commit, which is Amazon's version of GitHub. Microsoft bought GitHub for I don't know, like $1.6 billion a couple of years ago. But yeah, getting to know Git, no pun intended, will help. And it's always a struggle. You will do things that you don't do every day, but like you're always able, just like when you're writing normal code, you go look it up. Like, how do I do this in Git? Like, how do I cherry pick a file in Git? How do I merge in Git? Like there all these different things, and it's all stuff that you'll eventually have to work on. But as far as like in Code Platoon, you won't learn anything about shell scripting. You won't learn anything past the basic like shell navigation commands. You don't learn anything about Vim or Emacs per se. And if you don't know what those things are, you don't need to worry about them. But those are also all things that you can get a book on, you can buy a book, library, tutorials. There's thousands of videos on YouTube about that stuff if there's anything specific that you want to learn about. And I would say after you go through a boot camp and you get hired as your first job as a developer, picking up at least a little bit of like Unix administration or shell scripting will definitely help you as a developer, but that's not anything you need to worry about at this point. All right. Any other questions? Any questions about how I solved this? Okay, so picking the next challenge here. So let's go ahead and take a look at convert to hours and minutes. We're going to skip over mortgage payments. It's kind of the same thing as the other ones. This one will be a little bit more interesting. Let's see here. Let's go and forget. All right, so we've got write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. Examples, if I put in 125 for minutes, I get a string that says 2 hours and 5 minutes. Would you guys like to work on this independently? Would you like me to split you off into breakout rooms where we could do 3 or 4 people in a breakout room? One person could share their screen and you could work on it as a team, Or would you like me to lead another challenge?
Let's try groups of 3, 4 and breakout rooms.
Okay. And also, whenever we do a breakout room or an individual challenge, I will always come back and go over it as well. So it's not like you have to choose between me walking you through it and having the opportunity to do it on your own. So we'll do the breakout groups. We've got 11 people here. So we'll do 2 groups of 4 and a group of 3. And give me just 1 second here. All right, welcome back, everyone. We did the convert to hours and minutes, so we're going to go ahead and walk through this in class now. Let's take a look. We've got 2 examples down here. Let's do some more. That. All right, so we're gonna grab a little prep code snippet here as well, and we'll dive into this guy. Ghostwriter, grab the instructions. All right, write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. So I have 1 parameter coming in, which is a number of minutes. And I've got 1 return, which is a string, which should have number of minutes and hours, or hours and minutes. Example, see below, we've got 4 of them. And some pseudocode as far as steps to solve this. All right, so first things first, I know I need to divide my minutes by 60 and find out how many hours I have. Right? And that pretty much is what we did when we just converted the hours, but we also need to convert the minutes as well, right? So I need to know how many hours I have, but I also I need to know how many minutes I have left over. All right. So these are a couple of good first steps to get us started. So let's go ahead and figure these 2 things out first. All right. So if I do something like this, I want to just make sure that I'm seeing the minutes coming in. That'll be my first step here. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, there's my 125, 175, 55, and 121. So I know I'm getting those there. And I need to convert these to full hours. Did anyone take some of the people that got this far or solved it? What were some ways that you were able to take the minutes and parse out the full hours?
One of our group members knew the modulo.
Okay, so to do that modulo, well, the modulo will give you the remainder of minutes. So that'll help me find out how many minutes I have, but how many hours will I have?
Sam had a good way to get the hours.
And which was?
The one we did previously, just divide the minutes by 60.
Okay, so if we do minutes divided by 60, then I run it, right? So I've got 2.08, 2.91, 0.091. So how am I getting to a whole hour from this?
So my group, we did math floor, where we basically rounded down to the nearest integer.
Okay, so you use the math module?
Yes, sir.
Great. So let's take a look at that for people that didn't get to the math module. And there's different ways to do it, but this is a great way to do it. Is so when you're working with numbers in JavaScript, you have access to math. And math has all sorts of things in there and some crazy stuff like base 2 logarithm, base 10 logarithm. It does give you pi, square roots. We have some static methods, so absolute value will be super useful. Let's see here. So, and you said you used floor?
Yeah, math floor.
All right, so let's take a look at math.floor. Returns the largest integer less than or equal to x. So let's go ahead and plug that in over here. So let's take our minutes divided by 60, and we're going to wrap that in math.floor, right? And so as I type it in, we can see here, returns the greatest integer less than or equal to its numeric argument. So let's do that. Let's run this again. So 2, 2, 0, 20, or I'm sorry, 2 again. Like this is looking like at like basically what I'm looking for, the number of hours. So what I can do now is I can take this out of my console.log and I can say something like let hours equal this, right? And now I've got those variables saved each time for these. So now that I know I have the exact number of hours, what is a way that I can get the leftover minutes?
The modulus.
Yep. So we can use the modulo, and we're going to do a remainder operation, right? So we can take minutes and we can do modulo, and we should be able to divide it by 60 here, right? And let's go ahead and take a look. Minute is not defined, so let's do minutes. Right, so I know with 125, I should have 5 left over. With 175, 180 is 3 hours, so 2 hours, 55 minutes. There's my 55, there's my 55, and there's my 1. All right, excellent. So I know this right here is going to be equal to this. All right, now I need to return this in string form, right? It returns a string of hours and minutes. So let's go ahead and use backticks here. And let's do hours first. So we'll do, oops, hours. Oops, sorry, itching my nose. Hours and remaining minutes. So did everyone make it to roughly about this point? If not, no worries. What do we think is going to happen here when I run this? And I'm not returning anything yet, so I'm just doing the console. We can take a look here, right? So 2 hours and 5 minutes, 2 hours and 55 minutes, 0 hours and 55 minutes, 2 hours and 1 minute. Does anyone see any problems at this step?
Looks good.
Looks good. Look at my fourth example.
Yeah, you need to account for the single minute.
Yep. And if I need to account for the single minute, I probably need to account for the single hour as well, right?
I'm not following what the problem is with a single minute or a single hour.
2 hours and 1 minute. 2 hours and 1 minutes. Right. So right now, we are not accounting for the fact that if we have a singular minute or a singular hour, it's not 1 hour, it's not 1 minute, right? So that's a little twist in this one. So this is very similar to the previous ones, but as you go down the list, what you'll find is the next one down the list is going to be similar, but there's always going to be a little extra twist to it, right? And so now we need to take the next steps so that we can address this. Does anyone have any ideas how we can address this?
We can do the if one is less than or equal to, it'll equal a minute.
Okay, right, and we can. So you said if, what type of building block is that?
Okay.
So that's a if statement, that's conditional logic or control flow, right? So we could write something here and we could say if hours is triple equal to 1, and let's see here, we'll do let our string equal hours, and we'll say if hours is triple equal to 1, so if we only have 1 hour, we can say our string is now equal to just hour, right? And we can take this out and we can put a variable in here, so we can say our string now, right? And so something like this, and we don't really have an example that will trigger this yet, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and knock this down to 91 minutes, right? So now we should have an 1 hour and 31 minutes. It should be our answer to this, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And so now, see, we get 2 hours, 2 hours, 0 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, right? So we're feeling a little bit better about this at this point. All right. And we can do the same thing for strings, right? So we can say let, or I'm sorry, not strings, for minutes equal minutes. And if we say if minutes is equal to 1, we'll say minute, right? And so if we run this, now, whoops, I did not change it out down here. So let's go ahead and do that. You, and we'll say minute string. Right, so, well, 2 hours, 1 minute. What did we do wrong here? Because I said minutes instead of remaining minutes, which is what we're actually working off of. There we go, 2 hours and 1 minute. All right, and so same thing here. If I put 61 in here, right, I should have 1 hour and 1 minute. Now we're still getting all these falses because I am just console.logging and I'm not returning it yet, right? Like I'm returning undefined out of these. But if I take this out of my console.log and I say return, we get true. So this is the solution here. Now, this is a lot of code for what we've got going on here. There's a couple of different ways to clean this up. Has anyone heard of a ternary operator before? And if not, no worries.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone want to take a stab at describing it? What it does?
It's basically a one-liner that allows you to consolidate an if statement. That's
Correct. An if-else statement, right?
right. Sorry.
So a ternary operator is basically one line simplified context for a if-else statement. And now I could make this an if-else statement, right? So I could say, if it's not equal to this, our string equals hours. right? And then I don't have to do any assignment up here. I just do declaration, right? So I'm declaring my method, or I'm sorry, I'm declaring my variable, and then I'm coming down here and I'm assigning it one of two values depending on the outcome, right? All my tests still pass. Now, what I can do is I can get rid of this if else statement and move it into a one-line statement here. And so I can say, I'm going to assign my variable the following value. I'm going to say, is hours triple equal to 1? Question mark, which is the if, and then this will be my true value, and then a colon, and then my false outcome, right? And so for true, what I'm looking for is hour, and if this resolves to false, so if hours is 0 or 2 or any other number than 1, I want it to say hours right here. All right. And let me just put a little comment here. So ternary operator format is this, right? It is logic, question mark, true outcome, false outcome, right? And that's our one-line if-else statement. So I've taken all of this code and moved it to right here. Right, and I can do the exact same thing for minutes. So I can say, we'll just copy this down here and we'll say remaining minutes. If that is equal to 1, give me minute. If not, give me minutes. All right, so I can delete this all through this. All right, get rid of all of that. And this is a lot cleaner, right? And let's go ahead and run it. And I get true for everything, right? So these are doing the exact same thing that those if statements were doing previously in a lot cleaner chunk of code. Right now, ternaries are limited because they are only an if else statement. So if you only have one outcome, or if you need like a else if in there with multiple levels of outcomes, if there's different branching logic, you can write nested ternaries, right? So like if there was a third option, I could write another ternary in here. So if this is false, throw it into another ternary. That's messy. Don't try and deal with that right now. If you need more than 2 outcomes, an either or outcome, just write a multi-branching if statement. So an if, else, right? But if it is going to be an if else statement, feel free to use a ternary whenever you'd like to, because they're a little bit less code to write. And we still get the same answer. All right. And so with this, a couple more steps in the pseudocode is okay. So that's how I would solve this one. All right. Any questions on this one? All right, let's go ahead and pick out another one here. All right, let's go ahead and look at, we've got 33 minutes left. So I will do the SpaceX countdown one. And this will be the first one that we use with the loop. I'll walk the class through this one. We'll explain everything. And then that should put us pretty close to the end of class. Anyone have any questions for me before I launch into this next one? All right. So let's go ahead and grab the prep. All right, so notice this one, instead of using function, this one is done as a ES6. So we've got the fat arrow function here, exact same thing as putting function here, just a slightly different syntax. All right, let's open up the README. Let's go ahead and grab all of, well, actually I just need to grab this. All right, so we want to write a function that takes in an integer as seconds and prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. And once there are 0 seconds left, we have, once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. All right, so print or sends to the console how many seconds there are left until liftoff. And once there is 0, it will actually return liftoff, right? So there's one parameter. And looking at the seconds, it's going to be a number. And we're going to still have a return. We're going to send a lot of different things to the console, but we're going to have one return, which is a string saying lift off. All right. And so an example would be a countdown from 5. And we'll just say, I guess we can grab this. Pseudocode. All right, so that to me seems like some pretty well laid out steps. All right, so first things first, let's make sure that we are getting seconds the way we expect it to. So let's go ahead and just console.log seconds here. Eventually, all right. So there's our 5. So I know I get seconds passed through. Now I need to construct a loop here. So let's go ahead and say while count is less than seconds, and we'll say let count equal 0. let's see here. Well, that would be good if we were counting up till seconds. We're actually counting down. So let's go ahead and do this then. We don't actually need a second thing here. We can just say, while seconds is greater than 0, right? And then we'll just decrement 0 each time, right? So we need to console.log seconds inside the loop. And remember, if I'm not moving seconds towards 0, I will have an infinite loop, right? So if I just hit run right now, it'll just keep saying 5 over and over and over again. What can I do to move 5 towards 0? You want to take a stab?
Did you do seconds minus minus?
Sure could. So let's go ahead and do that. So we could do seconds equals seconds minus 1. We can just do seconds minus equals 1. Or we can go really shorthand and just do seconds minus minus. So let's go ahead and run this here. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're stopping before we hit 0. So how can I fix that?
Would you
Greater
do
than
a
or equal to 0?
Yep. So greater than or equal to 0. Let's go ahead and try that. Now we're getting down to 0. All right. So now I need to build out my actual string, right? And so we're going to throw this into backticks and curly braces and put a $sign there. And we'll say there are blank seconds left until lift off, exclamation point. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a shot. All right, so there are 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 seconds. So I don't like that there's seconds again, so maybe we'll pull a trick out from the last challenge and we'll add that back into this one as well. 0 seconds, and I'm returning undefined, and I know that I need to return a string that says lift off. Return, and we'll say lift off. I don't know why it's 1 word here and 2 words down there. So we'll just fix that. All right, so there's our lift off. So this is looking pretty good. And we can do the exact same thing here again. We can say let second string equal, and we can say seconds triple equal to 1. We'll do a ternary, right? And if that's the case, we'll say second. If not, we'll say seconds. Whoops, so we'll wrap that in a string. And then we'll take this out and we'll plug this in here and we'll say second string. All right, let's go ahead and run this again. Cool, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1 second left. There are 0 seconds left until liftoff, liftoff. All right, and so that is how we would solve this one. We could do this exact same thing inside a for loop. We could do it inside a ternary, or not a ternary. We could do this inside a for each or a dot map, but we don't need to. The while loop does exactly what we need it to do here. All right. If I wanted to do it in a for loop, I could do something like this. Say for let I equal seconds. Well, I is greater or equal to 0, I minus minus. All right, and we can take this and this, and we don't need to decrement the seconds in the inside the for loop because it's being taken care of in the top line. So if I comment this out and we hit the run button again, right? Whoops, we get 5 seconds over and over again. I equals seconds. It's because I'm saying I is equal to seconds each time. So we could do, let's see here. Am I missing some, it's because I need to change this to I, and I need to change this to I. There we go. And there we have the exact same result using a for loop versus a while loop. So either one tackles the problem the way we need it to. Any questions about either of these loops? Nothing? Okay. So it is 8:38. So we actually finished this one a little quicker than I thought we were going to. Do you guys want to have to talk about anything? Would you like me to do another challenge? Want to go to bed early tonight?
Can you do another one?
I can do another one. Let's see here. So we skipped mortgage payment, we skipped right triangle. Remove zeros. Let's take a look at this one. And if I'm skipping one, it's not because I'm trying to hide anything from anyone. They're just more of the same. So I mean, you can feel free to tackle these on your own. But there's nothing crazy about mortgage payment or right triangle. It's basically just some basic math and outputting a number. Or I think right triangle, you output true or false if it's a right triangle or not. I know one of the groups tackled it. All right, so let's go ahead and set up our prep again. Let's grab this. This one's actually a bit of a fun one. Has anyone solved this one yet on their own?
No.
No problem. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at our parameters here. So write a function that returns a number with all of the zeros removed from it. So it looks like I'm getting a number going in. So I have one parameter, which is a number that needs its zeros removed. Whoop, spelled zeros wrong, sorry. And our return is basically one parameter, which is a number with all zeros removed. Example, see below. All right, so do numbers have index positions? Trick question. I'll give you one guess.
No.
Correct. So if I say, because numbers, just the way their data types are, right? So if I have a string, right? So if I say, let string equal Charles, right? And I console.log string 0, right? What I would expect to see when I run this is just the letter C in the console, right? So if I take a number and I console.log 0, or the 0 index position of it, I'm hoping that the computer will yell at me, right? So I get undefined. It just there's nothing there. It doesn't have that anything. Doesn't know what to do with it. So I need to basically look for zeros, right? So what to figure out, like, because I don't care if it's 1,001, I don't care if it's 100, if it's 10, I don't care if this is 506. What do I need to do here? Like in regular, like talking to human things, like not computer instruction, like what am I doing here? Does anyone want to take a stab at explaining what you would like, how you tell someone to do this?
Are you just asking us to sort of like walk through how we would approach it?
Right. As a human, what I would tell you to do is say, hey, see this number, just erase all of the zeros in this number, right?
Right.
But the next layer down for that is like, hey, look at each digit in this number and tell me if it's a zero or not. And if it's a zero, just erase it, right?
Right. Okay.
And so how can we, and like we've already talked about this a couple of different times, like how can we take something and isolate each individual digit? We used a built-in. I kind of showed you this when we reversed.
Wasn't that the array thing where we split up
Yep.
the pieces?
So we use a split, but can we split a number?
No, you need to convert it to a string first.
Right. So we're going to need to take our number, we're going to convert it to a string, and then we're going to split our string, which converts it to what?
An array.
Sweet. All right. So we need to look at each number, or I should say each digit in the number provided. We will determine if that individual digit is a zero or not. If it is a zero, we will remove it from the number. All right. So now that's basically what we need to do. But to do this, I will need to convert my number to a string. I will need to split my string into an array. I will need to iterate through my array and look at each digit.
Can I ask a question?
Let me just type this and then I'll
Oh,
answer
sure.
any questions you have
Sorry.
before we start the code. I will then need to use conditional logic to take one of two actions. And that is, if it is a zero, remove it. If it is not a zero, leave it alone. All right, what is your question?
Never mind, actually. I have a theory, but I'll just like, I'll
Throw
just.
it out there.
No. I mean, honestly, well, so originally I was thinking that you were taking the extra step of converting it into an array so that you can use like a for each. But it looks like you might be going in a different direction. So I was like, I'll just.
Well, I am going to be doing a version of a for each. I'm going to loop through the array with just a for loop.
Oh, okay.
Right. So for each, again, that's a built-in that replaces a for loop, but just to make the syntax easier, and I'm going to keep doing for loops and while loops because I just want to hammer those two types of loops home because those are the only two you need to solve the challenges. Everything else is a more advanced way of doing either a for loop or a while loop. And just to well, everyone's learning, I'd rather have you try and learn 2 different ways to do it instead of trying to learn 5 or 6 different ways to do it.
So, okay. I'm sorry. So then is there a reason? Like, is it like just like computationally more I guess, what do you call it? Just like, does it use more compute or less computation power to turn this into an array and iterate through it rather than iterating through it as a string and then converting,
So
and then joining and converting back to a number?
so the problem, and I can show you what will happen with that, but the reason we have to go to an array, and because strings do have index values as well, and technically I can iterate through a string, right? So I can take a string, right? Like, so I can do something like this. I can say let string equal the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, right? And now I can say for let I equal 0, I less than string dot length, because string has a length just like an array does, I plus plus, in console.log string I. And when I run this, I should get every individual letter in the sentence, right? But this is a trap, and I'm actually glad that you bring this up, is strings are strings in JS immutable. JavaScript string is immutable, which means once a string object is assigned to a string reference, the object value cannot be changed.
Gotcha.
And because I need to take a string of numbers, right? So if I don't take the step to turn into an array, I just have a string that looks like this for 1001, right? And so I can iterate through it, but if I try and say string I, right, and I want to assign it a new value, we'll just assign it the letter A, and I console.log string, I still get 1001. And that is because I try to assign it the value of A, but a string is immutable. So the computer rejects it and it doesn't allow me to do it. And so when I'm trying to remove these zeros as a string, it's basically impossible. And I know this because a few classes back, I said, let's do it as a string, tried to do it, and then was like wondering why it wouldn't work in front of the entire class. And that's when I looked up that strings are immutable and you cannot do it this way. So, but this is a great point to bring up. And that is why we have to take that extra step to an array, because then we're not changing the string, we're reassigning a element in the array. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Right, so now I'm going to console.log my number, right? And let's go ahead and do that. And so there's my two numbers. And I want to do this to string. So let's go ahead and say, convert a number to a string in JS. To string. So just like we have a parse float or parse int, like we can also do to string. So let's go ahead back over here and we'll say number to string. Right, and now we see these printed out over here in white, which tells me that they're strings, which now I can split, right? So I can split, and we're going to give it just an empty string, which I'm telling it to split on every character, right? So now I have a string representation of these different numbers, each individual digit, right? And so now I can take this out of my console.log, and we'll say let array of string equal that, right? And if I do console.log r of string, should see the exact same thing over here, and we do. So now we need to loop, and you Ty, you had mentioned for each. We're just going to do it as a simple for loop because I want to keep it straightforward. So let's go ahead and say for let I equal 0. So we're going to start at the very first index position, the 0 index position. And we're going to say I less than, and this is where we stop counting, which is going to be R of string dot length, right? And because there is a length to the array, 0, 1, 2, 3, so a length of 4. This one would have a length of 8, and that's how we know when to stop counting. And we're going to say I++, which means that we're going to count by 1 so that we're going through every single character. So now if I console.log here and I say R of string I, and also just so let me cover this real quick, right? So if I just do console.log I is 0 and then it's counting by 1. So if I run this, I'll get 1, 2, or 0 through 3, and then I'll get 0 through 7. We're just looking at the actual iterator, which is what we're counting by. Now, if I look at R of string, right? And if I just want to see one index position in here, or if I just do R of string, what is going to happen is I'll get the same thing over and over again, right? So I'll get it 4 times and I'll get this 8 times, right? And if I just put the 0 in here, I'll get that first number in each of them, however many times there is the length. So 4 times and 8 times. But by doing I, each time we loop through, we're iterating, right? So I is 0 on the first time, I is 1 on the second time, I is 2 on the third time, I is 3 on the fourth and final time for that first number, right? And so I'm getting each individual number in here, 5, 0, 6, 8, 0, 0, 1, 9, right? 5, 0, 6, 8, 0, 0, 1, 9. So now I know that I have isolated each digit in my number, right, as a individual string. So what would be a good next step here? So would this be a good spot for some conditional logic?
Yeah, the work in, if it's 0, remove it. If not,
Leave it alone, right?
leave it.
Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and do a, we'll just start this off as an if statement. So we'll say if our string I is equal to 0, strictly equal to 0, then because we're dealing with a string, what I can do is I can just say R of I is now equal to an empty string. All right. And it only comes in here if this is the true case. If it's not, I don't need an else case. I don't need to tell it to leave it alone. It just leaves it alone automatically. So let's go ahead. Here's our if statement. There's exiting our if. There's exiting our for loop. So let's go ahead and say console.log R of string. And this will print out what our array of the string number looks like after we've gone through our loop. And it looks like we've still got some zeros there. And does anyone know what I did wrong? It's on line 24. What data type is each one of these elements?
Strings, and you said it strictly equal to a
0.
number.
A number of 0, right?
So you need to put brackets around it.
I don't need to put brackets, I need to put quotes. Right. And so now what I'm saying is this element strictly equal, is it a string, and is it a string 0? So now I've got 1 empty string, 1. So what was the built-in that we used to glue an array back into a single string? Does anyone remember?
Is that join?
Join.
Yep, dot join. And if we don't throw anything in there and I run this, I get some comma separated values. But if I give it an empty string, it joins on everything, and those empty strings just disappear, right? So 11 and 56,819, those look good to me. We're still failing because I'm not returning anything. And I'm also still at a string. So what I would want to do now is take this and let's go ahead and parse it back to an integer. Let's run that. And so now we're seeing that in gold. So we know those are numbers. Let's get rid of our console.log and let's go ahead and return it. And we pass. All right. So the big thing that we do on this is notice how I didn't do a bunch of stuff and then run it, right? I threw it in a console.log. I took my number and moved it to a string, made sure it was a string. Once I knew it was a string, then I put in my split. I made sure that it was splitting the way I wanted it to, right? Same thing when I joined it back. I joined my string. It looked good. I gave it my empty string inside the join, and then I did a parse in, then I returned it, right? So I took lots of little baby steps while I was hitting the run button over and over again so that I could see my progress. And where that looks like it's for the benefit of the class, and it is also for your own benefit while you're doing these challenges. Like, you should not be writing lots of lines of code or taking multiple steps and then hitting run. Do something, make sure you hit the run button and make sure that that one step that you took is doing what you were expecting it to do, right? Because you start doing this and then you write your for loop and then you write your conditional logic and you hit run and it doesn't work. Which part of this was the mistake made, right? And then as you get more and more comfortable, I mean, maybe you take a step or two, or that you know that you can run both of these built-ins at the same time before you run it. But in the very beginning, we should just be hitting that run button as often as possible. All right, it is 9 o'clock. Is there any questions on how I solved this? Any questions about the process? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.